Hello, everyone, Mariska here, and today I'm going to show you how my second consecutive race on the same circuit in MyWhoosh went. On Saturday, I achieved a great result, finishing in first place, and of course, I was excited to repeat that performance on Sunday. But Sunday brought a completely different story. But before we start, let me say this. This comparison between Saturday and Sunday is very interesting because it shows how the body responds differently on consecutive days. So pay attention to the details, because they help us understand not only the race but also the recovery process. In this Sunday race, I ended up finishing only in fourth place. And one of the most likely reasons for that is residual fatigue. I'm 46 years old, and recovery is no longer as instant as it is for a 20-year-old. 2 consecutive days of hard racing make a difference, and today you'll see that clearly in the data. Before the race, I already noticed that my legs weren't as loose. The muscles felt stiffer, and even during the warm-up, the sensation was that a bit of strength was missing. Still, I entered with a clear strategy. Try to save energy at the beginning, and focus on maintaining consistency in the critical sections. This recovery point is something worth highlighting. It's not just about age, but also about how each athlete organizes training and rest. In my case, 2 consecutive days already took a heavy toll. As I mentioned in the first video, indoor cycling is not just about getting on the bike and pedaling. The numbers are one of the coolest parts, because they show exactly what's happening in each workout. And for this analysis, I'm using data from MyWhooshInfo.com, which makes it much easier to see the maximum power in each section. Now let's compare the numbers from Saturday and Sunday, because that alone explains the huge difference in performance between the 2 races. On Saturday, my average power was 292 watts, practically equal to my FTP of 290. In other words, it was a race entirely at the limit, and my body responded very well. In the longer efforts, I delivered 291 watts over 20 minutes, 322 watts over 5 minutes, 381 watts in the best minute, and still finished with a strong sprint of 576 watts in the last 5 seconds. On Sunday, however, these numbers consistently dropped. The overall average was 280 watts, below my FTP. Over 20 minutes, I dropped to 286 watts, a 1.7% decrease. Over 5 minutes, down to 305 watts, a 5.3% decrease. And in the best minute, down to 354 watts, a 7.1% decrease. Even the final sprint, which is usually where you give everything left, was only 499 watts, a 13.5% decrease. This drop across all intervals is the classic pattern of accumulated fatigue. The body tries to respond but simply doesn't have the same strength as the day before. Another important detail is heart rate. On Saturday, my average heart rate was 169 beats per minute. On Sunday, even with lower power, it rose to 171 beats per minute. This shows it's when you push hard, but the power doesn't come the way it should. This contrast between power and heart rate is one of the clearest signs of fatigue. The body tries to compensate but doesn't deliver the same result. And beyond these maximum powers, I also compared the 2 races directly in Intervals.icu, looking at power and cadence side by side. The cadence was practically the same on both days, which shows that my pedaling mechanics were consistent. But the interesting part appears when we look at the power graph over time. In the first 2/3 of the race, both Saturday and Sunday, the lines are very similar. The rhythm, the responses, and even the effort peaks stayed within the same pattern. In other words, up to that point, the body was still managing to keep up with the same type of intensity. Now, in the last third, the story changes completely. On Sunday, power starts to drop clearly compared to Saturday. And this difference appears precisely at the moment when the race usually decides who stays in the front group. On Saturday, I managed to maintain intensity and keep competing at the limit. On Sunday, that extra leg simply didn't show up. This visual comparison in intervals makes it very clear. It wasn't a lack of will or strategy. It was really the body not being able to sustain the same level of power in the most critical part of the race. This is the kind of detail that only appears when you look at the graph side by side. It's almost like watching the race in slow motion, seeing exactly where performance collapses. And to complement this analysis, I also looked at how my time was distributed across the power zones on both days. And here we can see some very interesting patterns. But before we continue this analysis, let me ask you something. Do you also feel tired after such an intense workout? What do you do to recover for the next training session? Leave it in the comments. I really want to know how you deal with this, and let's continue this conversation there. And of course, don't forget to like the video, comment, and subscribe to the channel. That helps a lot with growth and motivates me to bring more content like this. But now, back to our analysis. Here we can see some very interesting patterns. On Saturday, the race was extremely aggressive, almost 45% of the time in Z4, more than 20% in Z5, and still 9% in Z6, which are very tough anaerobic efforts. This is the typical distribution of a day when the body is sharp, lots of time at threshold, several VO to max efforts, and some very strong pushes above the anaerobic threshold. The sweet spot, which is a type of training we'll talk about later, was also high, almost 40%, showing that I managed to sustain a strong pace practically the entire race. On Sunday, however, the pattern changes. Even with similar percentages of Z4 and sweet spot, the higher zones, Z5, Z6, and Z7, dropped sharply. Z5 fell from 20.4% to 16.3%. Z6 dropped from 9% to only 1.6%. Z7 was cut in half. This means that on Sunday I could still stay at threshold, but I lacked the ability to explode in the critical parts. In other words, I had rhythm, but I didn't have the bullets to follow the stronger accelerations. Another interesting point is the rise in Z3, which went from 20.6% to 28%. This usually happens when the body tries to protect itself. Instead of going up to Z5 or Z6, like on Saturday, you stay in the middle ground, strong, but not enough to respond to the group's attacks. This distribution confirms exactly what we saw in the other data. On Saturday, the body was ready for everything. On Sunday, it still had rhythm, but lost precisely the ability to produce high power in the decisive moments. This type of zone analysis is very useful because it shows not only what happened in the race, but also how the body adapts. It's almost like reading a fatigue map. What I enjoy most about making this kind of content is being able to compare similar days with the same circuit and the same intensity, but with such different results. With the images from Intervals and MyWhooshInfo, we see there's no mystery. The body was tired. The power curve dropped, and the ability to sustain efforts decreased. At 46, recovery makes all the difference. And this is not something negative. It's simply something we need to understand and learn to respect. If you also train indoors and want to improve your performance, I highly recommend tracking your data. They show exactly what's happening and help a lot in planning workouts and avoiding overtraining or overreaching. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the analysis and want to follow my progress in the next races, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And now, let's keep training smart. See you next time.